I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker for this afternoon session, Terri Oda. Terri specializes in saying no and explaining things, which either describes her professional work as an open source security expert, her personal time as the parent of a child who always wants to know what's happening, or her volunteer service bringing new contributors into Python projects through Google Summer of Code. Terri will be available for Q&A after her talk on vulnerability scanning for free, as in Puppies.
So, why should you care about known vulnerability scanning? The idea behind a known vulnerability scan is that you've got a piece of software and you want to know what's wrong with it. You want to know which publicly known security vulnerability is affected. So, since software isn't usually one thing anymore, that probably means not only the software itself, but also all of its dependencies, maybe some of the tool chain as well. It's meant to be sort of the basic hygiene level of security work, where it's not going to tell you where future issues are going to be. It's not going to do forensics on a compromised system. It's just going to tell you about the publicly known stuff. Should be pretty simple. The reason I want to tell you that you should care about it is that you should have a passion for software quality. Hopefully, you're coming out to a Python conference, you probably care. And obviously, I care a lot about it in terms of security as a security professional. But saying that let's be honest, people aren't doing vulnerability scanning that often right now. And saying that it's because they don't care about software quality is a trap. I mean, that would be like saying that people who don't go to the gym 3 times a week somehow don't care about their health. There's a lot of costs and times and other tools available that might have higher priorities that come into making this decision. But in 2023, probably a lot more of you care about vulnerability scanning, and that's because someone is telling you you have to. So we've had some big security incidents over the past many years. Most recently, Log4j really impacted a lot of people. And people, when they were cleaning it up, found, it was really hard to see all of the places that were affected by it. And we had the same thing with Heartbleed and any number of other ones. And after a while, people think, okay, I'm tired of cleaning this up. This was not fun. Maybe we could do a little bit better. Maybe we should work on at least that sort of basic level of hygiene so that we know and so that everyone gets notified and I don't have to build a list of all the software that might be impacted by this thing. And so that's what people are starting to do. So this is coming up in US governmental regulations, such as the Executive Order on Improving the Nation's Cybersecurity. We're seeing it in the EU under the Cyber Resilience Act. We're seeing it in other countries too. And many of you may be experiencing it in terms of corporate policy, where in preparation for these things to impact us, we want to be ready. And a lot of it sort of comes together under the heading of supply chain security, which can mean very different things depending on what the supply chain is for. So if you were talking about baking a cake, this would mean things like making sure that your kitchen is clean and that your tools are clean and that you aren't putting rotten eggs into it, because it doesn't matter how good your recipe is. If you put rotten eggs in a cake, it's not going to be a very good cake. And I want to say that a lot of these rules and policies have really been made with the best of intentions in mind. Like we just want to at least raise the bar. But unfortunately, there's a little bit of magical thinking involved, and there's a lot of barriers to getting that bar raised that maybe weren't quite anticipated. The other question you probably have about this talk is why is it free as in Puppies? So many of you have probably heard that open source often says that free can mean more than one thing, right? So you can have free as in beer, which means that the software doesn't have any cost, or free as in freedom, which would mean that you have access to the source and explicitly given rights to modify it and do what you need to do. But I'm going to say that vulnerability scanning is free as in Puppies, which is to say that there may be no upfront cost, but you're signing up for years of food and walks and vet bills and training. This is not really something that's free. And obviously, I like this metaphor because that's my pandemic puppy right up there on the screen. So why should you listen to me? I've got a PhD in computer security, a master's in artificial intelligence. I've been in open source for a little over 20 years. I started as a teenager. If you're in the Python communities, you probably know me as the person who wrote a lot of the documentation for GNU Mailman, or the person who does Summer of Code with the Python Software Foundation. I'm a professional open source security expert, which is to say I get paid to improve the security of open source projects. I work for Intel, and I'll be talking about an Intel project today, but I'll give you the standard disclaimer. My opinions are my own and may not be reflected by my employers. My pandemic puppy has made it to 2 years old. We made it through the puppy stage. He actually knows what to do. And I'm a mom to a human child too, all of which has given me a lot of experiences with life changes and automation and making sure that things happen even when you are maybe not as cognitively there or don't have as much time as you would like to have. So I'm going to talk about one specific vulnerability tool called CVE Bin Tool, and it's free as in beer, it's free as in freedom, the source is all available to you, and it's free as in puppies, which is to say this is a tool that you will love to hate, I'm sure, as it can potentially cause you a lot of work. It's my favorite tool because I'm the open source project maintainer, and I have been since it was released a couple of years ago. And it's written in Python, so any one of you should be able to go in there and make it suit your needs as you will. So the lazy explanation for how to run this is, well, you pip install it and then you run it. But of course, it couldn't possibly be that easy. So it turns out that the database that has the list of known vulnerabilities requires an API key. So if you're going to do that, you should probably get an API key. And if you're sitting in the room at PyCascades right now, maybe wait until you get back to your hotel because it has to download a lot of data and it will absolutely be not great on the Wi-Fi. Those of you at home, go right ahead. Do your scans while I'm talking. You'll have questions at the end. So we can do two different types of scans. If you are scanning something that maybe you don't own or you don't know what's in it, you can do a component discovery scan. Just give it a directory. It'll try to guess what's in it, and it'll try to tell you what vulnerabilities you need to worry about. If you watched Anthony's talk yesterday on SBOMs and you have figured out all the tooling and you know exactly what is in your software and you have a list, then you don't have to do this guessing game. You can just use that list and scan it directly, which is a lot simpler, but you have to do a lot of the work beforehand. So once you run that, it's going to, well, honestly, it's going to sit there for 10 minutes downloading data the first time you do it, and then it's going to start spitting stuff out. So what's happening under the hood? So the first thing it does is it downloads the CVE data. CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. It's basically the data format that we use for known vulnerabilities. And you'll see I sort of use vulnerabilities, CVE interchangeably throughout the talk. So you download that data. The key source is NVD, which is the National Vulnerability Database. And despite the name, it is not national, it is international. It is the entire world's worth of data, but it is maintained by the US government under NIST. Thanks to a Google Summer of Code student, we also have access to a number of other databases of vulnerability information, including Red Hat, the open source vulnerability database, GitLab, and some data that we get from specifically about curl. From there, we have our little split. On the bottom, if you have an SBOM, you just read in that list and move on. On the top, we have to guess what the components are. And the name CVE Bin Tool, the bin refers to the fact that it works on binaries. So you get a bunch of binaries, it opens them up, unzips them, whatever it needs to do, and then it takes a look at the strings inside to try to guess what it is. And you might think, what? How does any of that work? So imagine if you were given a box of stuff from someone's garage and said, what is this? Is it safe to use? And you pull out things like, a lamp. Okay, what is this? Is it safe to use? And you could go and you could look on the bottom, and there's a serial number, there's information about what it is and how to use it. We're doing basically the same thing with binaries. It turns out that most open source or even closed source software developers don't really want to hide what they are. So you have the equivalent of Blue Lamp 1.2 written somewhere in that code, probably. And if we can find that, then we can identify that component as Blue Lamp 1.2. Obviously, this doesn't work for everything, but we do have 274, I think, 270 some checkers that work for this, and you can add your own if you've got components that you want to match. We also have the ability to look up sort of language component lists. And normally I spend more time explaining this, but since you're Python people, probably all of you have experienced requirements.txt, which gives a list of things that your code would use. And as you know, requirements.txt maybe doesn't include the version information, so we can do a little bit of fancy work to figure out, well, if I installed this right now, what would I get? And then we can get that number to use for looking up vulnerabilities. So then the next stage is creating a list of known vulnerabilities. You create a list of CVEs, so you do all those lookups. The step after that, you'll need to include additional data. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in the talk about why this is so important and how you're going to have to, you're probably going to need this very frequently, but this is extra information that you've gathered and extra things that you've maybe done to address issues. And then finally, you stuff all this thing into the report generator, and it can give you a bunch of different types. If you like generating this in code, maybe it'll be JSON. I'm going to show you the HTML version. And if you don't know which one you're going to want, you can actually generate all of them at once. So then you can look it up later. So this is the HTML version. You saw the console version in the earlier one. This is just the top of the report. And you can see, well, maybe you can't see because it's very small, but it scanned a temp directory on my laptop. It scanned nearly 5,000 files. It found 9 components that had vulnerabilities. It found 38 things that it could identify but didn't have any vulnerabilities. And it's giving you some information about what those 74 vulnerabilities are and their severity. And if you sort of scroll down on there and click through, you can look at each individual component. So this is the one for OpenSSL, and you can see we've opened up the data about one specific CVE, so you can see what it is, what causes it, how to fix it, all of that information. And a lot of these also have a bunch of links to more information that you might need. It's not just one little blurb. And the first time people run this report and see something like that, the response is usually, panic. So I get these questions that are like, what do I do? I found something. And the snarky answer is that you should just fix it. I mean, that's what you do when you find a security hole, is you fix it. But of course, it's not really that easy. So probably all of you know some of the steps that go behind the scenes in the engineering aspect of updating a component, but let's talk a little bit about the security steps, and I'll group them into 4 different areas. So number 1 is triage. The first question you have is this real? Is this result real? So as I said, we are guessing the components, and even if you're using an SBOM, there's always a chance that someone forgot to bump a version number, so check and see whether that is correct. Go through, click down or search the CVE number, they're pretty unique, and learn more about the security problem. The other question you need to ask right in that first step is this CVE, is this vulnerability even valid? And I think people are often surprised because, it went as far as getting into the National Vulnerability Database. You would think there was enough quality control that we would never see bad data here, but turns out that databases are full of data made by humans, and the National Vulnerability Database is no different than any other. So sometimes there's like an off by 1 error, and sometimes the entire CVE is just incorrect. It was an artifact of some weird install or a misunderstanding of how something was meant to be used. I would say that even just with my relatively small library that I'm looking at, we see one of these every couple of months, maybe once a quarter. So this is absolutely a thing you are going to encounter when you start scanning regularly. The only reason people maybe didn't see this before was because you scanned maybe once per release. And so by the time, unless you got unlucky the day that you checked, a lot of these things get cleaned up. It takes a little while though. So assuming that all of these things are real and that they affect your product, the next step is updating. And if you're lucky, in fact, most of the time, this is where it ends. I go in, I see, is there an updated version of this library? Can I just upgrade it? I bump the version in my requirements.txt or wherever it happens to be for different languages, rerun my validation tests, and we're done. We're fixed. Everything's great. That's not always going to be the case, though. Sometimes there's no fix available because they're still working on it. Sometimes there's no fix available because no one's working on it and no one knows who to contact to work on it, and it may take a while. And sometimes you aren't in the habit of updating regularly, and there's been an API change or other software change that affects you, and it's going to take a long time to fix it on your end as opposed to the remote end. It doesn't really matter why. The end result is you're going to be stuck for a little while. So then we go to step 3, which is mitigate, which means basically we know there's a risk. We want to make sure that people can't reach the bad part of the code if possible, or the chance of them reaching the bad part of the code is reduced. Maybe only admins have access to this dashboard in your web app, or we've disabled certain algorithms, or sometimes a configuration change is all this means. Sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's very hard. It's very specific to whatever the actual issue is. And then the last step that you hope you never reach is replace, where sometimes this thing is just never going to be fixed. Either it's because the maintainer has abandoned it, they got a new job, whatever. It's because the architecture was just so bad that it can't be fixed. And I will say that the number one recommendation here is don't just search and take the first, Stack Exchange or whatever result that you find. Those will tend to steer you wrong. The older things tend to bubble up. If you're at the point of needing to replace for a safer alternative and you have access to any sort of security professional, ask them, see if you can bring them in. That will save you a lot of time and a lot of choosing the wrong thing and having to do this all over again in a few months. So let's talk a little bit about unfixed and unfixable issues. So I think everyone knows that sometimes fixing issues can take time. Now, in an ideal situation with software security, we have sort of a procedure. You find the vulnerability, you notify whoever's in charge and give them time to fix it. They do the fix, maybe work with you to make sure that it is the correct fix, and then they release a new version. And then after that, you go and make the vulnerability public. So if this is all going really well, then there is no time when the user has to be vulnerable. If they keep things up to date, then they're fine. It'll be fine. That's not always the case. Sometimes people don't know who to contact. Sometimes people are just being rude. For whatever reasons, sometimes they try to contact someone and they get no answer because the email that they had that first Git commit in is long since out of date. Whatever the reason, sometimes things don't get fixed, and you have to be prepared that things are going to be vulnerable for some amount of time. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, it depends. You also have to be prepared for, as I said, CVEs are filed by humans, so the vulnerability database is not perfect, and sometimes things are wrong. The other type of vulnerability I see somewhat frequently is people reporting things that are intentional behavior. So one of my favorite ones is a PDF library where they got a bug report that says, did you know PDFs can have images in them? And the developers were like, yes, if you don't want them, don't put them in. So in that case, mitigations you can do. We can make it so you can't put arbitrary images from evil.com, and we can make it so that you can disable images entirely if you know you're never going to use them, but there's no fix for that. It's like saying, did you know that Python can run arbitrary code? And the answer is yes, that's what it's for. So disputing these issues can take time. Sometimes people just don't want to do it, right? They don't care that they have a CVE associated with some random open source library. It works for them. It's fine. So yeah, you have to be prepared that some of the things that you're finding through your regular vulnerability scans are just gonna sit there for a while, maybe forever. And so that's bad enough when you do it once. But this is not something you do once. So just like when you brought that puppy home, you committed to feeding him every single day and walking him every single day and taking him to the vet and doing all the stuff. With a vulnerability scan, you're committing to fixing all the issues as you find them. I mean, the minute you know about it, it's sort of your mental ticking time bomb, maybe. How often you do a vulnerability scan sort of depends. I mean, it's not like the dog. I don't necessarily have to do it 3 times a day, but a lot of people will want to do it more frequently rather than less frequently. So for CVE Bin Tool itself, we actually scan every single pull request that we get so that we get early warning if someone's trying to add a dependency that's going to be a problem for us. Most people probably wouldn't want to do it that often. Maybe you do it once a day. As I said, a lot of people previously would do this just before release. So, just do it once per release, which sounds really nice, except if you find something and it's broken and all of a sudden your entire schedule is thrown off. People don't like that so much. So I would recommend more often than once per release. And honestly, it's fast enough that you can run it on every pull request if you wanted to. That would be fine. I will say that it doesn't download all the data every time, so you can set it up to cache. And then once that's done, depending on how big your project is, it can be very, very fast to do. And if you're using an SBOM, again, it's already got the data. It can be very fast to do the scan. So back to the big questions of this talk, all of these policies that we're starting to get in, are they going to be a problem? I mean, you can see already that they're going to drive up the costs of building software. This is an additional amount of stuff that you have to do, and potentially a lot of extra stuff you have to do when an issue occurs, when there is a vulnerability. But let's go back to my dog. So if my dog were trying to set a policy that said, when he was a puppy, what would he have said was an appropriate policy for walks? And when he was a puppy, he would have said, the appropriate policy for walks is that it should not be raining. I know, he's a lab mix. He doesn't know he's supposed to be a water dog. And worse than that, I live in the Pacific Northwest in a really soggy part of it. It rains here most of the year. So yeah, that's a really unfortunate policy. And we're sort of seeing some of the same as people are starting to work out what a vulnerability policy should be. So we'll say, well, there should be 0 vulnerabilities. Sounds pretty reasonable. We're not going to buy any software with vulnerabilities. We're not going to produce any software with vulnerabilities, which is great until you realize that it rains all the time and there's always going to be something. And that's bad enough for one small Python library. It gets a lot worse when you have a big library or a big anything. So one of my colleagues had done some work on Linux, just trying to see how many many days of a year are there that there's no vulnerabilities. And the answer was, if you're lucky, one day a year that you can have a Linux with absolutely 0 vulnerabilities. Now, some of those vulnerabilities are probably not very important, right? They're very minor, very niche, mitigated reasonably well, but they're there. So if your policy is a sort of 0 tolerance, once you get to larger systems, you're going to have some problems. There's just isn't such a thing as a large system with 0 vulnerabilities all of the time. And so if you're shipping something bigger than my one little Python library, say you're building a car, yeah, that's going to be really inconvenient for you. And we have to also think about what these rules do to the whole ecosystem of vulnerabilities. So is it more expensive to fix the vulnerabilities, or is it more expensive to prevent people from reporting them? And this could be sort of a, legal, we're going to sue you if you give this talk on our software at DEF CON type thing, or something that sounds a lot nicer and less malicious, like we pay out bug bounties for bugs, and oh, well, we fixed this one, but we decided that it wasn't quite important enough for us to file the public vulnerability. Or worse, we paid out this bug bounty, but we decided it wasn't important enough to file a vulnerability, and you can't talk about it because the paperwork you signed says you don't talk about it in public until we talk about it in public. Yeah, so that's not great. And then what about the other side, where if I don't like a company, maybe I should file some spurious CVEs? Obviously, it's possible to get those in. I could probably make it believable. It would be bad. And yeah, it's not a good time. Changing the motivations is hard. And I wish I could say absolutely nobody would ever do this. Like, I would never do this. This is unethical, whatever. But I drive one of the Dieselgate cars, which you may remember as the cars that made headlines because they lie when you try to run an emissions test on them. Unfortunately, once you make it worthwhile to lie or to cheat the system, and then you up the stakes, I think we're increasing the risks that bad things are going to happen. So that leads us to a question that I can't answer. What should we be doing about the quality of publicly known vulnerabilities? Do we make it so people have to file vulnerabilities? Do we have fines if they don't? Do we have fines if you file a vulnerability that's incorrect? Do we have more people checking the reality of vulnerabilities? Do we have to bring product teams in? I don't know. There's a lot to going on there. And what we do is going to be somewhat situationally dependent, and what level of regulation and policy you're talking about. So maybe a better question is it possible to make policies that won't ruin everything? And I hope the answer is going to be yes. Certainly my dog, once he accepted the reality that we live in the Pacific Northwest, decided that maybe a little bit of rain was okay. And maybe it was okay if I had a raincoat. So I think we're going to see people figuring that out and figuring, maybe some vulnerabilities are okay. Maybe we need windows in which they have to be fixed. Maybe we can accept long-term mitigations in certain circumstances. And a lot of that is, again, going to be very situationally dependent. So I'm hoping we're going to get there, but it's going to take a lot of data about what our reality of software is, and a lot of cooperation between different groups to make sure that what we propose is viable and not going to just cause problems all the way along. So in conclusion, vulnerability scanning and puppies can make your life better. My dog gives me an excuse to go outside. I get healthier from walking. I learn more about the ecosystem around me and all the flowers that are coming up right now in the spring. Vulnerability scanning my project, same thing, makes my project healthier and helps me understand the ecosystem of tools and dependencies that I use. It's not a one and done. You're going to be walking that dog every day. You're going to be doing those scans every day. And there's a lot of work, and it's not always fun work. Sometimes you're picking up after your pet instead of, enjoying a nice pat. But like raising a puppy, it gets easier with experience. I've taught the dog to do different things. He knows not to pull so hard on the leash now. He knows that he can wear a raincoat and it'll be fine. Similarly, I'm getting used to updating my projects a little bit more frequently than I might have when I was first starting 20 years ago. And I'm getting used to reading the information and knowing what to expect. And finally, policy is hard. I mean, there's no way around it. We're probably going to have some rough points before we figure out what works and what doesn't in this space. But I think we're going to be able to raise the bar. It's just going to take a little while. And so just to put all these up, there's those links again. And if you're at the conference and you won't be able to run this till you get home and have fast internet, there's my email and Mastodon, and I'll be taking questions in the Q&A room as soon as I log back in. Thanks, everyone.